Thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join this webinar with us. My name is Allie Music, and I have the pleasure of facilitating today's thought leadership webinar entitled Create an Enterprise-Grade Direct Access Program for Independent Professionals. This webinar is sponsored and presented by MBO. Today's webinar is meant to be interactive, so please submit your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll do our best to get to them. If we don't get them during the webinar, we'll make sure that you're followed up with after the webinar. Before I have a few housekeeping items, I'll make it short and sweet, and then we'll jump right into the webinar. I'd like to cover some of the resources we have here at SIG. SIG events. We'd love to have you at one of our signature events. We had about 15 in total this year. We still have a few more remaining for the rest of the year. Please look at our schedule and let us know if you have any questions. As you know, since you're on the webinar, we do have webinars. These went on Tuesday and Thursday, sometimes both days, sometimes one a week. Love to have one of our webinars. We have thought leadership focus and solution deep dive focus. So two different types. We'd love to have you. Our is an opportunity to ask members top of mind questions. You look at our peer-to-peer through our website, and you can search by keywords if there's a topic you're interested in. This center, we call this our SIG Google. It has over 5,000 tools, templates, white papers, presentations, and research documents. You can also by keywords or types, such as white papers or presentations. Great for anyone who's looking to fill a job or looking for a new job. You can do full-time work as well as internships. So take a look at our career network. It is a membership benefit to be able to put any of your opportunities on the career network, and we'll promote them through a weekly blast that goes out on Mondays. And student talent outreach. This is an opportunity for you to find talent within the SIG community. Our students do come to the summits. I think we had about 10 at the last summit, and we're going to continue to hopefully do that, have not the events. Global partnerships that are new-ish to SIG. First one's Barreau. We have Art of Procurement and HSS. If you have anything about these partnerships and how they can help you, just send us a quick note, and we'll make sure to explain them to you. This presentation is aware of our global summit. We have 2 a year. The spring is usually in March or April timeframe, and the fall is not October. Our next one is Rancho Mirage, California, the week of October the 15th. We hope to have you there. The certification program. Oops, went slides over. SIG University is a certification program. We have several different types of classes. We have 2 starting in July, and they're going to restart back in September, and then we're also starting our new risk program in September. So if you have any questions about SIG University for your workers to start. Next, jumpstart right into the webinar. So this is sponsored and presented by MBO. We have 2 speakers. I'm just going to read a short bio for both of them. First one is a man. She is from MBO. She joined MBO back in 2017 and leads their direct to independent sales program and Connect business unit. Prior to, she spent 7 years as the director for PwC, responsible for leading several enterprise-wide initiatives. She saw the design, development, and launch of the PwC Talent Exchange, which is a place connecting top independent talent with workforce opportunities. Before PwC, she spent 15 years as a management consultant. Second speaker on this presentation is Eric Rumbaugh. He advised clients in all areas of labor and employment law. He is now recognized law practice in the area of contingent labor and regularly reviews procedures and contracts. We're still on the presentation with us, and would love to have you kickstart this today. Thank you.
Right, so I'll go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining. Let's see, how do we get to my next? The presenter. Great, thanks. I'll go, we have a handful of slides here, but quite honestly, as folks have common questions throughout, please feel free to submit them. I think it's really nice if it's an interactive discussion, so I'm happy for the interruptions. So a couple slides here just to tee up why folks go down this path, and then the rest of the slides are, there's around, I think, about 8 of them, which really talk about, as you're going down this path, what are things to pay attention to? Like, what are the minefields where it may fall apart, specific sort of things that you can do to ensure that a program around direct sourcing will be successful. Because at the highest level, it sounds very compelling and interesting, and it's certainly the right direction to go, but I find there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. Folks don't realize it until they get into the middle of it, okay? So this is meant to give you a sneak peek into some of the lessons I've at least experienced firsthand in terms of trying to launch a direct sourcing program, okay? So the first couple slides are around why, and I think the first one is really important. I think, you know, cost obviously is an element of it, but also I think, and I'm on this call recognize this, but there is a war for talent in that the really high quality premier talent have a choice. So they are getting multiple opportunities presented to them, and you want a way to attract that top-notch talent, just like you do things to attract top-notch full-time employees. You really need to think about independent talent the same way. In fact, many of those folks have even more options on the table in front of them. So you need to think about what are the things that would entice them to work with you. You know, what are the things you can do through a direct sourcing program that enables you to develop the right types of relationships with them, so that when they wake up in the morning, they want to come work for your company and not somebody else. Okay. Oh, sorry. There, don't work. There are some economics to doing this, and I think this is probably what a lot of times first draws folks into this, which is decreasing the cost by primarily, the main economic is really cutting out some of the layers. So instead of going through this other middleman to get to that talent, you can go directly to them, and that is typically your biggest cost savings. And again, it leads to that sort of creating that direct connection and building the relationship. But I think that's typically why people go into this, is they really want to cut out those middleman markups, which, I mean, you know, then they can run easily into the 40%. So if you can reduce those, that makes it a very appealing program. Okay. Keys to success. So this is, as you start doing this, what are those things that you should pay attention to and really keep your eye on to make the program successful? The first thing I'll say is the right leadership support. And it's not someone who just gives it lip service, but it's really having the right influential leaders who have very specific measurable targets, and there are implications for not meeting them, right, and visibility to it. So it can't be someone saying, we believe in this when we need to do it. There needs to be specific actions that are taken to promote it, specific actions that are taken when folks are not going the right path and utilizing this program the way they should, and really making sure that, you know, the organization has visibility into progress against those things, you know, who is really pulling their weight here and who isn't, and really being able to, not to be mean, but call folks out, right, and make sure that you're really driving the right behavior. It is something that has to be driven from the top down. It's very hard to push this up from the bottom. Okay. The thing is, make it easy for managers. So this is not their job. Their job is not to go out and find talent to do work. Their job is to complete whatever task they have at hand. And typically, this is just something they have to do to get their job done. So they're not well versed in it. It's a little bit of a hassle, right? They don't do it all the time. So every time they go to do it, they have to go back up a bit of a learning curve. So make it easy for them. Don't make them go to multiple systems. Don't have 5 different people they have to talk to. Make the process as simple as possible. And I know it's hard to that because typically bringing on independent talent is complex. There's so many moving parts to it and so many things involved that you have to manage. But in so much as you can make it simple for them, that is critical. Don't give them a reason to not want to go down this channel, right? Make it as easy as possible for them and really monitor it. Have check plates where you can see where there are bottlenecks so you understand where folks are getting held up and address those, right? Okay. A popular debate. So what comes first, the chicken or the egg? So is it that as you're building a direct sourcing program and you're trying to create a critical mass amongst your managers and the talent, do you get the talent in there first or do you get the open recs in there first? I believe you get the talent in there first for a variety of reasons. Number one, independent talent are are used to the idea of having a presence in a variety of marketplaces. So they'll create their profile and they'll monitor it, but they don't always have an expectation that immediately you will have an open position for them. So they're a bit comfortable with that sort of waiting that happens. The managers, however, when they have an open need, they need to get it filled immediately, right? So if you don't have talent already in there, you will have lost them, and you've lost an opportunity to really get another supporter for your program. Also, I would tell you that nothing will attract the managers to your marketplace better than a group of really high-quality talent that they can quickly access. So it just serves as a bit of a magnet for those managers when they see that talent there that they could quickly deploy to any open positions they have. Okay. Matching. There are a lot of folks out there that talk about AI and machine learning and algorithms and automated matching and how you're using independent talent is all about technology. And technology helps, but I will tell you that I think matching is more of an art than a science. I think the automated logic will get you so far, but there are so many nuances to matching an individual person to an open need. For example, if you're looking for a program manager, yes, you want someone with 10 years of experience, but maybe you want someone that has a really strong executive presence, or maybe you want someone who has experience in working across 3 different countries, or who has worked with other professional service firms, right, or who has experience with working certain types of situations or working with offshore facilities, right? There's so many nuances, and also what happens is typically the managers have ideas and criteria in their head that don't always make their way into the job description. So, and there's places where they're willing to give and take, and so you really need to have some human element in there to really find a talent that can match what that person is looking for. I think a lot of people think that, if it's just contract talent, so it's really easy to fill the role. But I think the rigor that needs to go into matching an independent professional to an open position is the same as what you would use for a full-time position, right? It may be that you're not looking at the person in terms of their career potential, but actually, in some ways, you're more critical because everyone expects an independent consultant to immediately jump into a job and get to work. They don't expect to have to take them up a learning curve and to train them. So we're actually less forgiving on the skill side, so it's even more important that those skill expectations and those experiences are accurately understood by everyone, and that we're able to find a match who meets that criteria. Okay. Trying to slide, and for some reason it's like technical difficulty. Oh, there we go, sorry. The thing I would say is let them come to you. So if you do it from a pure numbers perspective within your own situation, you'll always have fewer open positions than there are talent who could fill it, right? And trying to navigate through all the talent that could possibly fill your role can be a really daunting task. And I would suggest do what you can to find a way to let the talent opt in to you and to be able to find your open positions and be able to come to you, because they're the best ones who know whether or not they can fill a certain role. They also know whether or not they're willing to travel to that location. They also know whether or not they're available, and so on and so on. So instead of trying to cut across all the different ways talent may present themselves to you and the various types of information you have, and how do you choose across 10 people that all look exactly the same, and understanding who's available when, do what you can to make your needs public and discoverable, so that as talent is looking for work that could align with what you're looking for, they're able to find you. Okay, it's much easier to start from a pool of candidates that have opted into your open need than to try and go out and canvass the entire pool of folks that could be options. Okay. Also, one too, I would mention attracting them to you and getting them to come to you when they fill an open role. There's a big part of that is dependent on your brand. And so make sure that, you're promoting that, and also talent talk. So, it's funny because we'll work with these clients and we'll post an open position and we'll go to, and we'll use people, and they all know about the company, right? They know someone who's worked there. They know about how independent consultants are treated at that company. So be really careful, because the reputation of the firm is really important, and it's a bit of a small community at times as you're working with these various independent consultants. Okay. Sorry, the technology challenge. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay. The other two is it sounds really appealing to cut out the middleman and just deal directly with the tenant, but sort of be careful what you ask for, because once you do that, the beauty of it is you have this direct connection with the tenant. You're able to build a direct relationship with them. You're able to turn to them and interact with them and use them again whenever you want, going directly to them. At the same time, you're engaging in a relationship with them, and you need to constantly nurture that and be sensitive to it. So make sure that, in the beginning, you're setting the right tone in terms of how you interact with them, and really setting a precedence for why they're valuable, and creating that sense of a relationship. And everyone in the firm has to do that and treat them that way. When you talk to independent talent and you ask them, why they do this and what's really important to them, being valued and treated as a member of the team is probably one of the things they care about the most, and what makes them really want to work for another company. So be sensitive to treating that way. It sounds sort of obvious, and it's just sort of human nature, but I think a lot of times for some reason we think working with independent talent, certain things don't apply, right? But all the things that are really important in terms of how you would treat a colleague who's a full-time employee really applies the same to independent talent, okay? And this is the last one before I hand it over to Eric. What I say is this can be a really big undertaking. And if you're going to, as we said, start with having the talent first and having the opportunities come in, there's no way you can launch this and have enough talent to meet all of your needs. So you need to think about being really focused. So pick a few areas where you anticipate you're going to have demand, right? Work the folks that would have demand in those areas. Really understand what are the kinds of talent that they're looking for, what is the really important criteria for quality talent for them, right? Get talent in the marketplace for them. As those folks have open needs in those areas, work with them, hold their hand, give them a white glove treatment, help them have a successful experience in getting their needs filled through your program with that talent, right? And then monitor and learn like crazy the entire time, because there's a ton of learning, and there's so many things that you'll never anticipate are important until you actually get into this. And there's so many sort of like flaws and pitfalls in your process that'll really get played as you go through this. So I would really encourage a more of a pod approach, engaging with folks that will be champions for this after the fact, and where you can really sort of start to get some success, and then you want to really publicize that like crazy, because nothing attracts additional users and managers than word of mouth and other managers hearing about what a great experience this person had, what great quality talent they were able to get from this direct sourcing program. So you really want to be thoughtful, start small, set yourself up for success, right, and then really promote the heck out of it. Are there any questions? No? Okay. All right. I'll here and hand it over to Eric. And I will say that, this is all great, but you have to do all this with an eye to how to navigate the minefield of compliance risks. So while this is becoming a very popular thing to do, and there's a lot of folks that are very interested, there's a lot of places where, especially given the dynamic nature of what's happening with tax laws and all that, there's a lot of places where you have to be very careful that you're managing risk properly. So that I'm going to hand it over to the dashing Eric Rumbaugh, and Let me get your slide up here, Eric. So bad. Apologies for the delay here. I don't know this. It's the WebEx for some reason. All right. Awesome.
That I've referred to as dashing. That's
Yeah.
it. That's one time in my life I've ever been referred to as dashing, and my wife's not here to hear it. So, as Linda said, and there's a lot of things that bearance that Linda didn't get to, and I'll be very brief because this is not a regulatory webinar. It's a webinar and top tier things to think about from really someone who's done everything here like Linda. But as Linda said, there are laws that apply, and in a number of programs, business have short-circuited legal compliance and have created issues. And legal compliance doesn't have to be scary, but it needs to have a seat at the table. So a couple things I want to bring up in this regard. First, there's a perfect storm of conflict over worker classification. And by classification, I mean someone as independent talent. Are they really independent talent? The workers want to be dependent. With technological changes, the ability of workers to work independently has grown. At the same time, the globalization and other market pressures have forced businesses to be more efficient and to deliver just-in-time talent. The way businesses have grown over the last couple of decades to deliver just-in-time delivery of physical capital, now they're under pressure to do just-in-time delivery of human capital. And so someone might be able to bill at $300 an hour doing a particular micro task for 20, 30 hours a year with a client would be worth $50 an hour or even $30 an hour doing something for that same client the rest of the year. So they can avoid paying the overhead of their former employers, go off on their own, and bill at a very high billing rate, which would be lower than what they might have otherwise been getting billed at as an independent consultant, and it's great for everybody. Certainly there are workers who are mistreated, who really want to be an employee and should be treated as an employee under the law. But interestingly, the U.S. government did a study in 2015 where the headline was 40% of the U.S. workforce is contingent, but very linked to your report was a data point. The highest job satisfaction category in the United States by far is true independent contractors. I'll repeat that. Regulators and advocates and other people who challenge abuses of the classification, and certainly there are some. In the overwhelming majority of cases, ICE classification isn't abusive, and in fact, it has the highest job satisfaction of any classification in the country. This is per U.S. government data. So while there are some people who don't want to be, there are many workers who want to be, and they're there because that's what they want to do, and that's how they get the greatest satisfaction and the greatest money. So perfect storm. We have this drive towards efficiency, and we have technology making that efficiency possible for people to be independent. But the words of the former U.S. or paraphrase the words of the former U.S. Department of Labor administrator, the gigging of the U.S. economy, especially, well, not especially, but including for high-level knowledge workers, represents in the minds of him and in the minds of some people a fracturing or fissuring of the social contract, the delivery of social services, employment benefits, insurance, retirement benefits, etc. Sometimes unions don't like independent contractor classification because independent contractors can't be employees, and the big elephant in the room is the state and federal governments regularly run out data on how much money revenue they lose because of IC classification. Overwhelmingly, independent contractors pay their taxes and they pay them on time. I'm self-employed. I'm a partner at a law firm. I actually have a quarterly estimated payment due tomorrow. But not everybody pays their full taxes or pays them on time, and the government estimates that costs them hundreds of billions of dollars per year. So you forces trying to fight independent contractor classification, and yet the market is pushing towards a more and more independent workforce, or at least segments of the workforce being more and more independent. And so what results in is a confusing patch quilt of regulations. So point number one, so I'm going to count, but I've estimated that there may be over 100 and maybe even over 200 different definitions of who's an employee, different tests for employee status. If you are going to take the position that somebody is not your employee, they're an independent contractor, point one, there isn't one test. It's easy for someone to be an employee under one test and be an independent contractor under another. And the fact that someone is paid on a W-2 doesn't mean they're an employee. It's a factor. If someone has their payments reported on a 1099, doesn't mean they're an independent contractor. It's a factor, but it's not dispositive. And be an employee under one test and be an independent contractor under another. The federal tests are the economic realities test, which is the main test for wage and hour purposes, the common law test, which is the main test for benefits purposes, and that's the test applied under the Affordable Care Act. And then the IRS has its test, which are similar but different, but states have multiple different overlapping tests. I live in Wisconsin, like all good-hearted people, and Wisconsin has an unemployment comp test. It has a workers' compensation test. It has a wage claims test. It has a different test for civil rights claims, and that's typical. States have different tests for purposes, different laws, and you can get different results. So in several years ago, the U.S. Department of Labor, through rulemaking or through a regulation or a statute, but just through an administrative interpretive memo, issued an interpretation of the economic realities test, which is the federal test for wage and hour purposes, and we stood wage and hour law on its head. If you haven't read the David Weil memorandum, it rescinded last fall, but it stood the law on its head and took a handful of outlier cases and pronounced those as the Department of Labor's interpretation of what the law is, and started the presumption that everyone is and should be an employee of all of their clients and everyone who touches them. So should you be an employee, and not only is that good public policy, but you should be co-employee of multiple entities if they're all touching you. That was ended, and so at the federal level, we have no new rule. We just have the old rule. So people read the rescission of the Weil memorandum as greenlighting IC classification from a federal level. That's not true. What was the old standard, which wasn't IC friendly, and we have no new standard. So we went from difficult, complicated, multiple overlapping standards. Then with the memorandum, we got an outlier, open hostile interpretation, and now we've gone back to the old standard, which was not Shangri-La. It was livable. It wasn't a green light. We didn't have any sign on the horizon that there's going to be a new standard classification. And in any case, I would not make business plans around a standard that's going to change with different administrations. So there's going to be a new standard, rescission of an outlier standard, but no new standard. But the point here is the states have filled the field. So even have basically an old/neutral federal standard, are altering their rules rapidly and surprisingly in ways that make it harder to classify someone as an independent contractor. The big headline is California, not legislation, not through rulemaking, but through a Supreme Court decision, adopt a new, substantially more difficult test for IC classification, which is going to be difficult. So the the takeaway here, if you're engaging independent contractors, is do all things Liz is saying, get the best talent, but make sure that you have a tool in place with people trained to apply the tool to make sure people that you're engaging are in fact independent contractors. And patch quilt of state and local and federal laws, it's not impossible to navigate. You shouldn't regard it as scary, but it's something you have to pay attention to. Like in the law taketh away. There was a new U.S. Supreme Court case, the Epic Systems case, was, if I want to say there's two most important things in recent memory. One would be California adopting a new hostile terror IC status for employees. Almost twinned with it is the U.S. Supreme Court's Epic Systems decision. So those of you who are industry veterans will remember going all the way back to the late 80s, the Alexander versus Gardner Denver case, which dealt with arbitrability of civil rights cases, discrimination cases. Can you force arbitration of civil rights cases? And Gardner Denver said you can't divest EEOC, federal agencies, of the ability to investigate. So to the extent that you try and compelled arbitration, if you're trying to say, and EEOC can't investigate, that's against public policy. Was interpreted by us as being largely anti-arbitration. Then, several years later, in Gilmer's Interstate Johnson Lane, in an age discrimination case, the Supreme Court said, no, we didn't mean to be hostile to arbitration. In fact, civil rights cases are fully arbitrable. You can sign a pre-dispute arbitration agreement, and under the Federal Arbitration Act, that agreement's fully enforceable. And to the extent courts don't like arbitrating employment claims and think it's unfair to the worker to force them to arbitrate, or overturned those arguments. And after Gilmer, most state laws limiting arbitrability were found to be preempted by federal law and were found to be invalid. So Gilmer green-lighted arbitration. Then the arbitration industry got criticized for being unfair to workers, and in short, what they did is they make arbitration have all the bells and whistles of court. So they read the criticism by making arbitration as lengthy and expensive as court, with arbitration super unattractive. So those who've been practicing for as long as we have went from pushing to sloping or not even talking about arbitration because of the way the arbitration process changed. Then, several years ago, the U.S. court, in a case that didn't have anything to do with employment, AT&T versus Concepcion, over California rule that invalidated as being against public policy class waiver agreements. So in Concepcion, there was an arbitration agreement that said you can arbitrate, but you have to arbitrate as an individual. You can't arbitrate as a group. You can't arbitrate as a class. California had a rule that said class waivers are against public policy. It was called the Discover Bank rule. The U.S. Supreme Court said the Discover Bank rule is invalidated by, preempted by the Federal Arbitration Act. So that's the California rule. The California rule is invalid. Class waivers are valid. We don't arbitration. I don't like arbitration, but arbitration that can have a class waiver that's enforceable is very attractive. And in the system, the U.S. Supreme Court got question, does the AT&T Concepcion rule apply in our employment cases? The U.S. National Labor Relations Board argued class waivers are against public policy because employees of the National Labor Relations Act have the right statutorily to engage in protected concerted activity. So in this, it was one federal statute up against another, which is different than the California Discover Bank rule. In a huge victory for employers, the Supreme Court in Epic Systems did arbitrary agreements with class waivers in employment. Now, we're going to have rearguard anti-arbitration litigation for years, but this is good of a green light as a validation for arbitration as you can get. And again, the message here isn't arbitration's good, you should arbitrate. I still like arbitration. But an arbitration agreement that includes an enforceable waiver of class litigation is a big deal. And if you have not considered implementing a class waiver arbitration agreement, you should do it. And if you decide not to do it, you should think about it again. There are a number, you almost don't go a week without getting a new state law that impacts worker classification. Pennsylvania just implemented a new law that forces businesses that use contractors outside of Pennsylvania to do work in Pennsylvania to have taxes withheld. There's some interesting constitutional law questions here. Does this discourage interstate commerce? Does it violate the Commerce Clause of the Constitution? Something I have thought about since law school. If there's any lawyers in the line that would be saying, oh yeah, it's a Commerce Clause question. It's something about in con laws, first-year law students, and then don't think about it again. If you're a constitutional law scholar or lawyer, you might think a lot, but for me, I haven't thought about it in 33 years. But here it's going up as a issue in employment law. And then, that we just have a proliferation of state and local laws trying to discourage independent contractor classification. And so the takeaway here is it's an exciting era. The percentage of the workforce that's independent is large and growing. It's inevitable that it'll continue growing. It's inevitable that there's going to be ongoing state, local, federal, administrative, and legislative and judicial efforts to curb or reverse that trend. I predicted for more than a decade that the trend will reverse. I've been wrong every time. The trend continues growing. This is not something that anyone should be afraid of, but it's something that everyone needs to be cognizant of and take seriously. Linda talked about needing executive support for a program. The programs also need executive support for compliance. I teach a class on here for another group, and one punchline at the end of this section is always audit yourself, not in part to determine how well you're doing in terms of classification, but most to find out how people got into your program that didn't go through your classification tool. Because whatever tool you erect, people try and find ways to engage talent without going through the tool, and so you have to have executive support to make sure people can't evade your tool. Otherwise, you're not going to have a good, or you have a tool, but you won't be using it. With that, I will turn it back to Linda. We probably went over my time.
Do we want to open it up for questions? I didn't really have other material to cover unless you wanted me to circle back on anything.
No questions. That work for you both?
Now we're waiting for questions. I'm going to talk about kind of my compliance audit piece. So what I recommend...
I knew you couldn't be done.
Well, what I recommend that businesses do in this space is, first of all, if you're engaging talent as an independent contractor, you have somebody whose job is to look at the putative independent contractor and say, yes, you are an independent contractor, or no, you're not. And every business that has an office whose job it is to do that. So every large organization will have somebody whose job it is to say yay or nay on an independent contractor. If in your organization you don't have somebody whose job it is, or a group of people whose job it is, you need to get one. Somebody who looks at each new independent contractor and says, yes, you're an independent contractor, or no, you're not. And that decision has to be based on the different tests that apply. The main federal tests would be the economic realities test, the common law test, and the IRS test. And then you have state tests that vary depending on what state you're in. In some cases, you can get someone who's absolutely an independent contractor in Pennsylvania and absolutely not an independent contractor in Massachusetts. And that happens all the time. And there are a lot of people who are gray in both states. You need to have that office that's in place and trained to do this classification. If you don't have an office and you're not good at it, you can engage a third party to come in and train you or do your classification. There's a number of businesses in this space who do this. MBO is one of them, and that is a popular have people to deal with these difficult collection systems. But now, so I said I recommend that you audit. And I teach a class on this. I spend a lot of time talking about this audit. You do a couple things about auditing. One, you don't need to look at everybody. I'm a pollster, but pollsters get statistically valid samples for presidential elections doing, 1,000 people in the whole United States. If you've got hundreds or thousands of contractors, you don't need to look at hundreds or thousands of contractors to give yourself a report card. You can do enough to find out how you're doing. Are you getting 99% right? Are you getting 90% right? How are you doing? You want that report card. Two, you don't want to tell the workers that you're auditing them. You do this sotto voce. Because probably you don't have an issue, but you don't want to tell workers, hey, we're worried about how we classified you. But you want to give yourself a report card, and you want to do it periodically. How are we doing? And you're not doing a good job, get more training for your team, look at your tool. Everybody's tool is based on the test. If you take 100 companies and look at their tool they use, they gather data to classify people, they're asked questions that are paired up with the different tests. There's 7 in the common law test. We're going to have gathered data so we can find how we do on factor 7, how we do on factor 5 in economic realities test, et cetera. So all the tools look pretty similar, but there's garbage in, garbage out. Consultants and their managers answer questions, and they don't. Who's ever done one of these classes knows that you get answers to questionnaires that don't necessarily make sense, and a lot of times you need to do follow-up queries. But my biggest reason, as I said before, isn't just to give myself a report card on how we're doing. The biggest thing is find out how people got engaged without going through your classification program. You will find people who get engaged outside of your program in the darndest ways. And you find out why. So a lot of times the complaint will be this key manager, this key executive, the consultants that they want to hire, the contractors they want to hire, don't like going through the engagement protocol. It takes them, they don't like answering questions about their business. Question need to know the answers to determine if you can classify someone correctly. They don't answering those questions, and so their sponsor, their intervenes and says, "Soon have to go through this. Joe has to go through this. Just engage them." And then the gig's done by the time you get around to finding out that someone got engaged outside of your system. What are the complaints? It takes too long. It's too invasive. I don't like giving up this information. Your test is too difficult. You don't pass people. A lot of you get consultants whose lawyers and accountants will call you. Don't pass them. Will call you and say, "What are you talking about? I'm a lawyer. I work in this space. Joe's obviously an independent contractor, or I'm Joe's accountant, or I'm Sue's accountant. Obviously Sue's an independent contractor," and you get pushback. So you need to deal with the problems for your engagement tool, so that your internal audience, your internal client, is not dissatisfied. But also because if you have a tool and you have a process that doesn't acknowledge, recognize, and deal with those problems, you will continue to have lack of option. You will continue to have people aren't using your process, which Linda, for different reasons, flagged right away as being her big issue, is your executive cover to make sure your system gets used. For me, my reason for wanting to make sure that the system gets used is compliance. You have a system in the world on paper, and if people aren't using it, it's a good system.
I'll jump into some questions, Eric, and Linda.
Sure.
All right, got a handful of them. Folks that are on the call, please continue to submit your questions. If we don't get to them during the webinar, we'll make sure that you're followed up with afterwards. So question, are we able to stock our talent pool with contractors we've used before, but we're used to a staffing company?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the answer is it depends. So, you really have to make sure that that contractor is comfortable with the agreement that they had with that staffing company. So sometimes the staffing companies will have arrangements with a talent that say they can't do that, right, to join your marketplace. But it's a case-by-case basis. You obviously don't want to push folks to do something that they don't feel comfortable with and are worried about legally. I'm not sure, Eric, if you have a perspective on this, but I know that in the past when we've done this, we've really sort of decision up to the contractor, right, to make sure they understand the terms of their contract with that staffing company and to determine, right, what's appropriate.
Yeah, so there are a couple legal issues here. One, and then some second layers in the legal issues. One, you may have a contract with your staffing vendor that would make it liable to pay a conversion fee if someone that came to you first through the staffing vendor. Those are very common in contracts with staffing vendors. So if you're going to engage someone that previously came to you through a staffing vendor, that's legal, but you may, depending on how your contract reads, you may owe a fee to engage them that way. If you don't like the way the fee is set up, you should talk to your staffing vendor and change the fee. The second layer is the worker may have a contract with the staffing vendor that his or her ability to come work with you. So if you read your contract and your contract says whatever conversion fee, if you're going to hire someone as an employer or independent contractor that came to the staffing vendor, that doesn't fully answer the question because the worker may have a contract that their ability to come to work for you, and they may be breaching a contract, and the legal term for what you'd be doing then is you'd be tortiously interfering with a contract and creating legal liability. I'd say if it's an ongoing staffing vendor that wants to keep your work, they'll come with a way to solve this rather than sue you because you hired Sue. But it's something you should deal with, not ignore. I also say that in a number of states, and mine is one of them, the ability those contracts exist, but they're largely unenforceable. It's very difficult. It's difficult in Wisconsin, and Wisconsin is not the only state that has this problem, to have a enforceable conversion fee. It's done, and the staffing suppliers in Wisconsin that know about Wisconsin law have ways to comply. And we could talk to you about ways to comply if you want, but it's not, the fact that you sign an agreement doesn't automatically mean that it's enforceable. It's a state-by-state issue, and I would say the staffing industry has largely not paid attention to that. So now there's a fourth layer to the onion. If it was engaged with an employee for you, that, whether directly or through a staffing company, that does not mean that they can't thereafter come to you work for you as an independent contractor. It's perfectly plausible to be that someone could be an employee on Monday and an independent contractor on Wednesday. However, it's a red flag. In the IRS audit manual, that's a flag. That doesn't guarantee you get audited, but it's something that draws audit attention. So, we suspect, measure to cut once, if you're engaging someone as an independent contractor who theretofore had been a W-2 consultant, either directly or through a staffing vendor, and check your contracts. If you don't like the contracts and you've got a staffing vendor you're continuing to work with, get them changed.
So much. I appreciate it. All right, we're going to go to the next question. What would consider to be the minimum number of projects and contractors needed for a program to succeed? Obviously, an estimate's great. Thank you.
The minimum projects, is that what it was?
Minimum number of projects and needed for a program to succeed.
So it's all about managing expectations. So on the manager side, I think what we had typically done was said for every anticipated need, you should have roughly, maybe 30-ish talent that could theoretically fill that role, because there's a variety of reasons when you actually need that person to work that they may not be available. First of all, at any given point in time, most of the talent has another project that they're already working on. It doesn't mean they can't leave it, but they do. And other little things may come in like geography and things like that. So I would think of it from, in terms of the volume of talent, I would do it based on how much demand you think you're going to have. In terms of the number of projects, it is very common that you'll have the talent in there, and so it's hard. I feel like I'm dancing around it, but it's a hard question to answer because it sort of depends on the scope of what you're focusing on, right? If you're working with 3 managers, then there's not as many that you need, right? And then in terms of the number of projects, the balance you're going to have to strike is as a talent joins the marketplace and is working with you, if they don't see work out there, open projects that fit their need, they start to lose interest and they start to go stale, and they don't really come around anymore. So you want, I think, at least a couple. I'll tell you, in the pensions at PwC, I'd say we launched with maybe about a dozen projects, right? And we actually had probably a few thousand talent in there. We were trying to cut across about a dozen different skill areas. So I don't know that there's a perfect number. It's more about, I think, your ability to match the type of talent you're getting into your marketplace with the types of needs you're going to have. I hope that's helpful. It's hard to give you a concrete number.
I come at it from a different angle, Linda. There's 2 different critical mass issues that don't have anything to do with any law, just having to do with critical mass and practicality. If you don't have a critical mass of work orders, the contractor community is never going to find out about your program. You're not going to become the client of choice for the contractors, the go-to place for them to work, if you don't have a critical mass of stuff out there for them to look for. If there's a new restaurant or a new store or whatever, that no traffic, and you say, why are you open? Nobody's in there. Shouldn't you just close? The answer is no, we have to stay open so people get heads that we're here and we're open. And 6 months from now, we'll be busting at the seams. But if we just shut when we're slowing down, we're business going forward. It's the same thing with a program. You need to have the pump primed with jobs or get traffic. At the same time,
let me pause there. So that's the whole chicken and the egg. And I think it is ideal if you have a lot of open jobs in there to attract the talent. I think the managers are less patient than the talent is. And so what you have to do is it's all about messaging. So as you're trying to attract the talent, before you have this critical mass of open projects that will attract them, you're going to have to attract them by having recruiters and folks like that reaching out to the talent, inviting them to join and explaining to them that you're building a marketplace, right, and setting expectations for the ramp up of the available projects.
Completely.
Right, yep.
I agree completely.
We're in 7 minutes. We'll keep going through these questions and keep submitting your questions as we go through. 1, if a California contractor was properly classified but doesn't pass the new test, what do we do? So again, all that.
So there's 2 questions pregnant in that question. 1, you have to comply with the new test going forward. Period. Stop. The fact that you were correct under the old test doesn't mean you don't have to comply with the new test. So that's the easy part of the question. The answer: reclassify them. And we've talked to a lot of law firms in California and a lot of businesses in California, and everyone's answering the question that way. Just reclassify people as best you can going forward. Now, are you going to be liable for non-compliance with a new test that you didn't know about yesterday? It's going to be shaken out in the courts. I can't answer that question. But to answer the question you actually asked, which is what do we do, the answer is apply the test and reclassify people if you get a different answer. I would also say that as far as messaging, something to think about is when you classify people, you don't want to say they were misclassified previously. And I favor a blanket, or at least favor at least thinking about, and this is not legal, but this is strategic, a blanket, every California is an employee going forward, and really applying test. If you make an exception, you're an employee in California, that's a way for the consultants a message that, ooh, they misclassified me yesterday. So kind of a peeling off asbestos moment. The asbestos is fine as long as you leave it alone, but the moment you make the change, the moment you move the asbestos, now it gets in the air and now it's a problem. How off the asbestos is a strategic, not a partly legal question, but mostly a strategic question. And so A, reclassify people, but B, think about a way to package it that doesn't dirt on what you did yesterday. And that's one of the things that some businesses are doing, is just reclassifying everyone, whether you think you could justify an IC classification under the new test or not. And that actually requires some big brains to think about. The first question's easy.
One or two more questions, and then we'll wrap up with the end of the top of the hour. Next, how should we publicize our success? So that was an interesting question. My first thought was tell anybody and everybody. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. So you want to create almost a bit of a case study about it, right? Talk about the specific individuals, talk about the specific successes, because what's most powerful is if someone hears about a success and they can relate to it, right? And I think you publicize it by making sure that the leadership is sharing it, right? And every company has their own ways of sharing these things, these types of communications. As you, as the team driving the direct sourcing program, as you go out and talk to new managers, you share that success with them there. It's very powerful also if you can have those managers join some of these calls and help sort of recruit other managers and help sort of share their experience that way. So I think the most powerful way is when you can have that specific manager talk about it, whether it's just, you elect people that just naturally will talk to the other folks in an informal fashion, but also to find some venues where they can formally talk about it and where you can really feature them, and, whether it's email communications or whatever.
More, and then we're going to wrap up. Do you recommend adding a place to our career page where people can sign up for talent?
It's funny you ask. So I've been working on this at MBO because, as Eric will tell you, you have to keep a reasonable amount of distance between opportunities for full-time employees and opportunities for independent talent, right? You don't want it to appear like you're intermingling the two. But we've actually worked on with our clients is we at MBO will actually host a page for our clients where they can, in a way, market to the talent, talk about why they are a client of choice to their talent, and in turn then links them to open opportunities that enterprise has that we host for them. So you want to have, and the talent would discover that page a couple of ways. One could be maybe they go to your company page, your careers page, right, and you can say something about, are interested in working independently, and there's a link, and then they clearly are going somewhere different. So no, they're not looking at full-time opportunities, they're looking at contract work, right? Or you also, folks may just be Googling it, right, independent contracting work at PwC or IBM or whatever, and those pages would be discoverable that way. So you definitely want to have a place they can go. You just want to make sure you're managing in such a way where it's not intermingling with your career pages.
Keeping those two separate. Thank you so much. This concludes today's webinar. I appreciate your time. I hope everyone with the presentation loved it. We hope to see you at a future webinar, and just right now, in the next moment or two, all in the webinar will get the deck will be pushed through the WebEx platform. Thanks so much, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.